Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 35 Part 1 King of the Ants. About a year before the Korea-Japan alliance arrived on Jeju Island, the Ant Queen had a thought. We must leave this island behind. It was now nearly impossible to find prey, so her children frequently resorted to eating one another. By the time the population of the ant colony had hit several thousand, there was not enough food to sustain all the subjects of her queendom. We cannot go on like this. If the ants' first mission had been to conquer this island, then their second mission was to leave and find someplace teeming with life to build a new empire. However, the queen recalled the powerful intruders who had encroached on the island a few times. Although the queen's army had been able to defeat them, her subjects had sustained great damage as well. So many of her children had sacrificed their lives during those battles. Would they be able to fight them off in another land as well? I need a more formidable soldier. Her subjects required a mighty soldier to lead them. Thus, she decided on the direction of her species' evolution. About half a year later, the queen birthed said soldier. It was born from a combination of her mana and the plentiful nutrients she had consumed. She created a dangerous killing machine designed specifically to deal with the formidable humans. Using her resolve to create a powerful soldier and the prime directive to kill all humans, she manufactured a monstrosity. Her beastly child was born with a skill called predation, which gave it the ability to absorb part of an opponent's magic power and knowledge by consuming them. I want to get stronger. The beast even preyed on its own kind once it realized its true capabilities, and the queen let it happen, because what it wanted and what she wanted were one and the same. The queen was delighted as it got stronger with each passing day. As its strength surpassed that of the queen, she steadily prepared the new soldiers it would lead. Almost there. However, in the middle of the process, intruders arrived on the island once again. They were smaller in number, but much stronger than the previous parties. The queen had to smile, though. It was the perfect opportunity to test her creation's power before waging war on humans in another land. The queen sent it along with the other soldiers to protect her queendom. It completed the task she'd given it. However, it returned to find the queen dead. It was furious. Fortunately, there were still many humans left on the island at which to target its rage. The first to fall was the human king. The monstrous beast made quick work of all its subordinates as well. That was when one of them yelled something at it, as he sobbed before finally being killed. "What are you?" The predation skill allowed the beast to absorb the critical thinking abilities of the humans it consumed, so it pondered the question, "What am I?" It had simply been one of the queen's soldiers until then, but what was it now that the queen was dead? It was the only being capable of leading the soldiers of this empire. It knew only one word fit to call someone in that role: king. Having eliminated the king of his enemies, the monstrous beast believed he was qualified to be a king. Crunch. The Ant King bit off the head of the last human standing. But then, he suddenly gazed in the direction of his castle. An enormous amount of energy was emanating from the queen's final resting place, like an oncoming storm. It wasn't the kind of power a mere soldier could possess. Another king? The beast slowly rose and moved toward his castle, instinctively realizing that a threat had arrived. It was a bolt out of the blue. The mood in the control room of the TV station switched from that of a party to a funeral. The broadcast of the raid had been going smoothly up until the appearance of the ant with wings. They were flooded with calls voicing complaints and concern as soon as they hastily shut down the stream. Rying. An employee cautiously walked over to the executive director and reported, "Sir, I was told that our phone lines are about to break down from so many viewers calling in." The director looked up. So what? Do you expect me to show them that damn ant-ripping hunters apart? And no, sir. The broadcast had been cut just when the magic beast ant began single-handedly destroying the hunters. Naturally, the audience was desperate to find out what was happening, but the network couldn't exactly broadcast hunter mob being tortured or hunter men being eaten. The director moaned while burying his face in his hands. It's over. It's all over. This had been an all-or-nothing gamble with the network's fate hanging in the balance, and it had come crumbling down because of a single ant. Over. There was a heavy silence in the room. No one dared to open their mouth, except one person. Huh? A producer had been somberly monitoring the incoming feed. As sir. What? Someone else just appeared on the scene. The director responded without moving. Unless Jesus Christ himself shows up, I don't want to hear it. But it's all over. Realizing the director wouldn't listen to anything he had to say, the producer turned the volume up as high as it would go. Scraw. Scree. The air filled with screams from the ants. The director finally raised his head in shock. And he wasn't the only one. Every employee in the control room rushed closer to the main monitor. Exclamations tumbled out of their mouths. The dazed director finally lifted himself out of his chair. The crowd of employees parted to let him through. The contents of the monitor were reflected in his eyes. Dear God! Oh Lord! The director invoked a God he didn't believe in, then started barking at his crew. Don't just stand there! Why aren't you airing this? Do you want to be held responsible for withholding this kind of footage from viewers? The director could barely contain his excitement, but the producer urgently brought him back down to earth. Sir! If we start broadcasting now, we have to go live. It'll air in real time without a second's delay. If an emergency comes up, we can't do anything about it. The 10-minute delay between the transmission they'd received and the broadcast they were airing had been used up when they'd halted the stream. We're putting everything on the line. Pardon? We've already stopped the broadcast once, so we have nothing to lose anymore. That's true. Suddenly, an unknown hunter came into the camera's frame. They couldn't tell if the hunter was Korean or Japanese or whether he actually was a hunter, but they'd been granted a second chance at a gamble they thought they'd already lost. The director solemnly gave the order. Air it. No matter what happens, just air it. He pulled out a chair and took a seat next to the producer. Our network's future is in that man's hands. Ard. Even on the brink of death, the cameraman had no regrets. Pretty much everybody dreamed of this, of becoming a hero. He would have even been happy being a hero's sidekick if he couldn't be the hero himself. When he'd been working the odd assignment for the network as a cameraman, he had never dreamed he'd get that opportunity. But then he'd awakened as an A rank and gained experience as a hunter. And finally, he'd ended up on this raid. Because of that, he'd had the chance to capture the spectacle of Korea's representative hunter successfully taking down an S-rank boss on film. I'm the one who did that. This footage would let people know of the sacrifice made by the S-rank hunters in order to exterminate the ants. That was good enough for him. He felt like all his efforts as a cameraman and as a hunter had been rewarded. He did have one regret, though. Dad. After his mother had died of cancer, his father had raised him as a single parent. The cameraman now felt a profound sadness at not being able to see his father ever again. Crunch. He didn't feel a thing as an ant bit down on his shoulder, as he'd already lost the use of his arm a while ago. He'd endured until now because of his natural resilience as a tank, but he was reaching his limit. Thud. He dropped to his knees. Even in this moment, his father was the only thing on his mind. I can't believe the last conversation I had with him was whether he'd eaten dinner. Had he known this would happen, he would have made more of an effort to speak with the old man. He wished he canceled his previous engagements and spent the day with him that time his father had visited Seoul. Alas, time had flown by, and regret had come too late. The cameraman looked up. The horrifying mandibles of the magic beast ant descended toward his head. His mana reserves had dropped so low that he was unable to protect himself with reinforcement. Tears welled in his eyes. "Sorry, Dad." But instead, KRSH. With the loud noise of a shell being cracked open, fluid splattered all over the cameraman's face. Huh? A silver blade had penetrated the ant's skull. The cameraman's eyes followed the length of the blade to land on another ant with some red plumage attached to its head. An ant killed its fellow ant? No, it wasn't an ant. He'd mistaken it for one because both figures were swathed in black. A mysterious warrior dressed in black armor withdrew their sword out from the ant's carcass. Thud. The ant fell lifelessly to the ground, and when the shadowy warrior stepped aside, a familiar man approached and yelled at him. "Open your mouth!" "Pardon?" Before he could process the request, the man forcefully grabbed the cameraman's chin and poured an unknown liquid into his mouth. "Cough, cough!" The cameraman swallowed all the liquid even as he choked on a bit of it. He covered his mouth with his hand as he asked, "WH, who are you?" The man didn't answer, turning toward the other ants instead. "WH what?" Confused, the cameraman quickly got to his feet. Wait a minute. His legs were moving. And that wasn't all. He hadn't realized it immediately, but his arm had recovered as soon as he drank the liquid. What's going on? Had that man done something to him? There was no other explanation. It was then that the cameraman abruptly recalled where he had seen the face. No way. Could he be? Jin-woo calmly took stock of his surroundings. He was relieved he'd had the foresight to hide one of his soldiers in President Baek's shadow the day he met the Korean team members in the Hunters Association gymnasium. It appeared as though the TV broadcast hadn't been airing live, and the actual situation was much more serious. Jin-woo saved the cameraman first, since he was the weakest among the hunters here, but the S ranks were still surrounded by ants. What should I do? Fong could easily clear them with his fire breath, but Jin-woo couldn't guarantee the safety of the S-rank hunters. He needed another solution. Jin-woo quickly made a decision and turned to the giant next to him. "Iron!" The soldier smacked his chest as if to say that he knew exactly what to do. Iron's heavy body lumbered forward. He puffed up his chest and gave a great shout. "Groer!" Ping! Iron is using skill. Epic taunt. The effect was incredible. Every single ant in the vicinity quickly turned their attention to Iron and rushed him. "Good job!" Jin-woo patted Iron's shoulder and summoned the 2 daggers he'd acquired after killing the Demon Monarch. The Demon Monarch's daggers. The dagger's blade shone under the glare of Jonghyun's light magic. Screawall. Scree! A tidal wave of black filled Jin-woo's vision as several hundred screaming ants simultaneously rushed him. He gripped his daggers tightly and then disappeared from view. Scraw! Soon, Jin-woo's soldiers and the ants were locked in a fierce battle. Meanwhile, Yunho, who was in better shape than the others, hurriedly moved his fellow hunters to a safe corner. Thankfully, everyone was still breathing. The cameraman hastily lent him a hand. The 2 men were able to safely finish their task because Jin-woo, or rather, Jin-woo's minion, had lured the ants' attention with an aggro skill. Huff, huff, huff! Dongwook leaned against the wall to catch his breath and grab Yunho's arm. "WH, what's going on?" Who's fighting now? His vision was blurry due to an injury to his eyes. Yunho covered his hand with his own. Master Ma, it's okay now. Everything will be fine. Yunho turned to watch Jin Woo. While the others were still unaware, Yunho had a rough estimation of how powerful Jin Woo was. He couldn't help but be alarmed when Jin Woo had suddenly appeared where the soldier in black armor had stood. Before he knew it, though, he'd yelled at Jin Woo for help. As Jin Woo and his soldiers charged at the ants, Yunho's legs almost buckled in relief at the sight. As he expected, the ants that had been a real challenge for Yunho and his teammates were quickly mowed down by Jin Woo as if they were toy soldiers. Scraw! The screams coming every which way from the ants were quite nauseating. Yunho let out a sigh of relief. Everything's fine now. He didn't say this to Dongwoo, but thought to himself. Renewed hope for surviving this ordeal blossomed in his chest. He trusted in Jinwoo's power more than he'd ever trusted the 20-plus Japanese S-rank hunters. I guess there's no place for me in this battle. Yunho settled down beside Dongwook with a smile. The only thing he could do currently was silently observe Jinwoo at work. He turned to the cameraman and gestured to Jinwoo. Please follow that man closely. You'll witness something incredible. He had only heard about the Red Gate and the Hunters Guild incidents from others. This was his opportunity to see things unfold with his own eyes. Yes! The cameraman kept his distance, so as not to interrupt the battle, and trained his camera on Jin Woo. The strike squad's job was done, but he still had work to do. Gulp! He swallowed hard. Scraw! Jin Woo cleanly sliced an ant's body in two and looked around the area. He'd already dealt with about half the ants. He'd cut down a countless number of them without breaking a sweat. Truth be told, this was less of a challenge for him than the top floor of the demon's castle. Should I speed things up a bit? He inspected the black smoke coming off the ant corpses and gave an order. Arise! The cameraman's blood ran cold. What's going on? Something strange was happening. Wind was blowing through the underground cavern, which should have been impossible, and it sent a chill up his spine. And also, right as he noticed the eerie silence that had settled over the area. Cree! Black hands shot out from the ground as deep moans echoed through the space. Tack! Tack! The hands slammed down firmly on the stone of the cavern and pulled their respective bodies up out of the shadows. Whoa! The cameraman inadvertently gasped out loud. His eyes were wide, and he began to panic. Despite the things he'd seen as an A-rank hunter, he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. So how would the viewers at home react to this? As he continued to stare aghast, the owners of the black hands fully emerged. Magic beast ants? At a glance, the creatures looked just like the ants, save for the black smoke rising off their bodies. It was hard to tell if they were solid or made of gas. It was like someone had made magic beast ant models out of black dry ice. Several hundred of these creatures emerged from the ground. The cameraman's heart pounded, and he had trouble breathing. Yunho also couldn't help but gasp at what he was witnessing. Though he was calmer than the cameraman, his mouth hung open too. Those are all his minions? Unlike the two men who were at a loss for words, Jinwoo regarded his additional soldiers with satisfaction. Excellent. Jinwoo Shadow's soldiers now outnumbered the magic beast ants. I don't have to raise a finger anymore. He returned the demon monarch's daggers to his inventory and relayed his first order to his new recruits. Don't leave a single enemy alive. Go. Scraw! Just as the ants had rushed into the den earlier, Jinwoo's shadow beasts swarmed toward them. The endless horde of ants was swept away by a sea of black. Yay! The control room of the TV station burst out in loud cheers. The executive director leaped to his feet and clapped. "That's it! Yes!" A weight lifted off his shoulders as he watched the refreshing sight of the ants getting wiped out. It was like 10 years of indigestion had been instantly cured. Had there been no one else around, he would have asked the producer to send him this video clip. He could have used the footage to de-stress for months and years to come. It had been devastating to see Hunter Byung-min's tragic death. It had felt like the sky was about to come crashing down when the only healer on the team died at the hands of the magic beast. Still, if the remaining members could safely escape from the ants' cave with the help of the mysterious Hunter, that would be the best-case scenario. The Korean team had already accomplished their main mission of assassinating the queen. Without a way to breathe, the ants would soon vanish from the island. And what about the Japanese team? Since they'd abandoned their mission, not only did Korea not have to fulfill their promise to Japan, but they had the right to hold them accountable later. The cherry on top was that this footage could be sold for a mint. The director's face was aglow. Where did this lucky charm come from? The director's eyes twinkled as he watched Jin-woo. That was when one of the crew members approached him. "Sir!" The startled director shot out of his chair. "What now?" The director's face hardened. Things had been going swimmingly, so what could have gone wrong this time? His heart was already racing. He was starting to intensely dislike the employees who reported things to him. If he could prevent bad news by simply forbidding them to speak, he would. "This is driving me crazy." Unaware of his boss's thoughts, the employee's face glowed as he exclaimed, "That man! I found out who he is!" The director's eyes grew wide. "What?" Inside the president's office at the Hunters Association. Crack. President Gun Hee-go quickly let go of the couch armrest. The doctor seated next to him looked at him. "President Go, I got a bit too excited." He had unintentionally clenched his hand and crushed the armrest. But how could he not get worked up after seeing that footage? His emotions had welled up as he watched Jin-woo's performance on the sizable TV. If his body had allowed it, he would have participated in the raid as well. "Getting overexcited isn't good for your health." Gun-hee nodded. There was only one reason why he, the president of the association, wasn't in the mission command room. Whether the operation was a success or a failure, the stress would have been too much for his heart. For that same reason, his doctor had elected to stay and monitor his condition, as even watching it unfold on TV was risky. Should I have stopped President Go from watching the raid? The worried doctor questioned his own judgment, but he shook his head as he took in his patient's expression. Ever since Hunter Sung had initially appeared, the president's smile hadn't left his face. "It's Jin-woo!" Gun-hee's shout when the situation had switched from desperate to hopeful still rang in the doctor's ears. Gun-hee laughed. "I can't believe this." He delicately gripped the armrest of the couch again. He needed something to ground himself, as his body was itching to join the fight. How did Hunter Sung even get there? Gun-hee was rather curious about that. How was Jin-woo able to arrive on the island teeming with ants without anyone knowing? But that kind of thing wasn't important. What was important was that Hunter Sung was there at all. Because he was, there was hope for the other hunters yet. Those two facts were all that mattered. That was when Gun-hee stared in shock as he watched Jin-woo extract shadows from the corpses of the ants to create more soldiers. That young man lied to me. That wasn't just 100 minions. Even based on a rough estimate, there were at least 300. Even so, Gun-hee didn't look like someone betrayed. He wore a pleased grin on his face. He said that he wanted to fight magic beasts. Gun-hee now understood Jin-woo's reasoning behind that statement. With such power, Jin-woo would be unafraid to face any magic beast. He actually seemed exhilarated, and anyone watching him would feel the same. So why had Jin-woo declined the invitation to join the Korean team in the first place? I guess he had something more important come up. Gun, he firmly nodded. A man who looked like that when confronting magic beasts would have otherwise joined the raid team. Gun, he became lost in thought as he wondered what Jin-woo's reasons were for not participating. Bang, bang. Jaina, who had been studying in her room, went out to the living room at the racket. Mom? I'm sorry. That was too loud, right? Jaina shook her head. The volume had already been turned down to a point where it was barely audible, so as to not disturb Jaina's studies. So she didn't want her mother to make more of a fuss. No, it's okay. But what's wrong? Is the TV broken? It just stopped working. Where's Jin-woo? He's right here. Her mother blinked in surprise. Oh, where did your brother go? He was here a minute ago. Jaina shrugged and opened the door to Jin-woo's room. Jin-woo? He wasn't in the bathroom either. After searching the whole apartment, Jaina turned to her mom. What were you two watching? The Jeju Island raid. Jaina felt a sudden uneasiness as she recalled that the rest of the apartment building had been rather noisy for a while now. Could it be? She rushed back to her room and turned on her cell phone. As she did, yee! As intense cheers exploded from every corner of the building, Jaina froze in shock at what she was seeing on her phone screen. Jin-woo? As soon as he'd finished off the ants in the Queen's Den, Jin-woo sent his soldiers back to his shadow. Not all the ants that had been dispatched throughout the island had returned, so Jin-woo figured his priority should be getting the hunters to a safe location before they ran into more of the monsters. Some of them are injured, after all. He walked over to the raid team. With the exception of Yunho and the cameraman, the rest seemed to be in pretty dire shape. Hain was still unconscious, and the other 3 hunters' injuries were definitely serious. Where's Hunter Min? Jin-woo asked. Yunho shook his head with a mournful look on his face. Jin-woo summoned healing potions to treat the hunters. He had to feed them the elixirs, since they'd lost any effect if he wasn't holding onto them. With each draft, another hunter recovered. Huh? Taijia blurted out as he sat and patted himself up and down. But Jonghyun's and Dongwook's wounds were also healed. Cough! Jonghyun hadn't the faintest idea what was going on and blinked at Jin-woo in confusion. Hunter Sung? Why are you here? Let's talk outside. Oh, Jonghyun took in their location and nodded. They were in the deepest part of the ant cave, not the best place to have a conversation. Master Sung. Dongwook, whose eyesight had been restored, clasped Jinwoo's hand firmly. You were the one who fought those ants, weren't you? Thank you. Thank you so much. Jinwoo responded to Dongwook in the same manner. Let's talk outside. Understood. Hain was the last one. Jinwoo's forehead wrinkled as he bent down in front of her. That's odd. Her life force is too weak. He was filled with a sense of foreboding as he carefully poured the potion into Hain's mouth. Sure enough, a message immediately popped up. Ping. Healing potions cannot recover HP when it dips below 10% of your total HP. Jinwoo frowned. When he lowered her head back to the ground and pulled his hand away, he saw that it was covered in blood. That damn ant. The beast had given one of the most distinguished Korean hunters a life-threatening injury with a single blow. The other hunters had survived not through their own power, but because the ant had been toying with them. Jinwoo's expression hardened. But first, treating Hain's wound was the most urgent priority. She needed to get off the island as soon as possible and see a healer. since potions weren't having any effect. Let's hurry! Jinwoo gathered Hane's prone form in his arms and stood. The other hunters got to their feet as well. As he tried to hurriedly lead everyone out of the queen's den, Jinwoo let out a long exhale. Yunho understood why he did. Jinwoo passed Hane to the guild master, who took her with a flustered expression. I'll help you. Jinwoo glanced at them all and firmly stated, Please do not intervene. It'll go faster that way. Jinwoo, you mean? Jongin tried to say something despite not fully understanding the whole situation, but Dongwook shook his head and cut him off. Though the tank hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he'd been able to sense what Jinwoo had done to the ants from start to finish. Jinwoo was correct in this instance, but Yunho was still worried. Hunter-sung, Jinwoo turned to him. I know how strong you are. There probably isn't anyone who understands that better than me. However, Yunho's expression was serious. You've already summoned too many minions, haven't you? Why would that be a problem? Jinwoo stared at Yunho, uncomprehending. Flustered at the lack of reaction, Yunho hurriedly explained, You've probably consumed a ton of mana already. What are you going to do if you run out? Jinwoo understood now. Guessing from what Yunho was saying, other hunters who used summoning magic required a lot of magic power to cast their spells. They don't need to know that summoning my shadow soldiers doesn't use up mana, do they? His shadow soldiers clearly didn't look like run-of-the-mill minions anyway. Jinwoo chose his words carefully. My minions don't consume much magic power, so there's no need to worry about that. Huh? What? Yunho and the cameraman exclaimed at the same time. Jinwoo didn't need a ton of magic power to summon all those minions. Did this man have any weaknesses? Jinwoo looked toward the exit of the cave to avoid explaining things further just in time to see ants rushing inside. So many of them. They had an injured member, so there wasn't any time to waste. Jinwoo activated Monarch's domain for the sake of efficiency. The ground beneath his feet started to turn an inky black. But before he could summon his soldiers, an ominous wind blew in from the other side of the cave. Jinwoo sought out the origin of this sinister energy. It was one of the ants. Despite being similar in appearance to the others, this one clearly stood out from the pack. It's him. Jinwoo instantly identified the Ant King. The Ant King also noticed Jinwoo and leisurely made his way over. Human, the energy is strong in you. He spoke in Ruji's voice. Remembering the nightmare they had just endured, the other hunters backed away, but Jinwoo held his ground and quietly leveled a glare at the beast. The Ant King stood in front of Jinwoo. Are you the king of the humans? To think a bug could talk. At Jinwoo's mild response, the ant's face twisted horribly. Using the strength he'd inherited from the queen and the power he amassed from predation, the Ant King combined all his magic power to make his body expand. He was originally the same height as Jinwoo, but quickly grew to 1.5 times his opponent's size. He roared as loudly as he could right in Jinwoo's face. Scraya! Jinwoo didn't even blink. Instead, a grin spread across his face. You're finally starting to resemble a bug. He then unleashed his own magic power.